Alright, so for the other ones, let's go back up here. I'm gonna make the scattering into a moon so we can actually see the reflection differences. So as we are on the moon light, so it's nighttime, we're gonna use the other two light sources, which is one is projected and the other one is omnidirectional. So when we go down to lights, we actually have both of them right here. Projected light, which I'm just going to put it here and raise it up, and the other one I'm going to put it on his other side, and I'm going to make it as an omnidirectional light and just move it up. So the difference between two and why it's not working on these guys, we'll talk all about that right now. So before we even do that, let's just start here, and you'll notice that it has the same settings as what we had with the sun, and we're gonna do the exact same thing, just play with it how we like it. I'm just gonna keep it at 10,000, 15,000 ish, and the FOV is over here about 60. So what's the difference between omnidirectional and projected light? Now when you click on projected, you'll notice that it's more of a cylinder slash cone. Not really a cylinder, but more of a pyramid style look. The projection light basically means that there's a point over here that's a very small point, is only throwing light in a specific area. The FOV, or the field of view, decides how big or how wide or narrow this light is gonna be. The lux is the intensity, and then we have the power, distance, and penumbra. Now if you remember, penumbra is the blurring, so if you decide to say no blurring, it's gonna look weird. So we actually have about at least a 0.5 blurring. The distance requires how far the light can be seen. We set 100, so it's pretty strong. The power can be beyond 1, so if we just say 5, it's not too bad, but we'll stay with 1. And then we have shapes. Now the only reason I'm going through the projection because Omni also has the same thing. The shape itself, we have 4 different shapes. We got the point, which is just one little point side. Sphere is a little circle that's just shooting light in that way. Capsule is shooting a light in a capsule-like shape, and then rectangle is shooting it in a rectangular shape. You have the ability to change the radius, which also changes how strong it gets. The length changes its length, and the height changes the other side, so L and W. Let's just keep it over here, and then let's go into omnidirectional. Omnidirectional, unlike the projected, is actually a point in space where light equally shoots out all over the place. So if I were to just do this, probably do around here, and let's just make it into a sphere and increase the radius. Now we have 2 light sources that act upon it. Now you'll notice that we did not have any sort of shadows being cast by this guy, and that's because we disabled it, just to show you guys the difference. So first things first, we're gonna go here and then we're gonna click on this guy. But before you notice is it's still not working, and that's because of the lightning mode. So if we go back here on both the projection and the Omni, so if I were to go here to the Omni settings, you notice that it's on static mode rather than the dynamic mode. Even if we change it, it's not going to change anything until we change the main character's lighting settings. And then we also have, if we go down here into the mode settings, it's on mixed rather than static. Now I'll tell you the differences later, but for now let's actually cause him to enable shadows. So once we go into lighting mode, we change this to dynamic, and now it actually creates some form of light, some form of shadow reflection. My bad. And here we go. We got 3 different shadows, one coming from the moon, one from the omnidirectional, and one from the point light. Now let's go back down here. And yes, both the Omni and the projection have the exact same settings. If we go here, we will notice that they have the same settings, even the distance visibility, how long we can see these things. You play around with it, you can do it. And then we go into shadows are enabled, into mode, where we were before. Mode is a very simple, well, it's a very simple situation. So if I were to change this to dynamic, you'll notice that we don't really have that mode setting anymore because it's exclusively for static objects. So once you click on an object or on a light to make it static, and then you choose the static over here, what that does in mode is that it's only going to affect objects that are going to be static, that are unmovable in the scene. So like your rocks, your buildings, something that's just not going to move, the light is going to be affected for that only. And even then, it's not going to be affected for like simulation, but rather it's going to be affected for voxels and for baked lighting. Oh, and if you hover over it, you'll see this setting. If you do mixed, it's going to do both of them, meaning dynamic movement. So if objects are meant to be moved, it will cast render projection for them, and at the same time it will also cast lighting for baked map settings. Now this setting is one of the more useful settings inside Unigine. If you were to have multiple lightings and you decided to use, instead of the mode static, you use dynamic, what would happen is you would lose a lot of performance because of that. Now if you had specific lighting that you wanted for a character, like let's say a flashlight, and you would use the light projection, you could go ahead, go up and change the mode to dynamic. But if you had lights like just sitting around, so like flashlight or a light that's in the middle, what do you call it, a street light, or like lights from the lawn, or car lights that are just sitting parked on the side, those lights require static and it requires a mixed. That will create simulations and at the same time create a little bit of baking for non-movable objects, thus saving you a lot of performance. If you had an object that is like your flashlight or your like belt buckled light that you have for your game for some reason and you need to move it around, go dynamic. Other than that, static. Oh, I talked a lot about that stuff. But anyways, so once you're done over here, there's a resolution setting. Don't touch this. This will destroy your computer a lot if you go anything above 2048. If I were to go to 16,000, you'll notice my FPS dropped all the way to 5, meaning it's just highest quality shadow reflection and shadow calculation, but my computer's taken a hit from that. So we're gonna go back into the 512, which gives us enough shadow calculation and looking pretty well done. We also have the Penumbra, which basically splits the shadow into multiple pieces, and then the filter, and you know how to do this. The screen space shadows, just as usual, I decided not to use it. And then we have the lens flare, which if we look at it, gives us the lens flare, and everything else is the same for this stuff. Alright, so that's it for the two lighting settings, because it has the same settings as that. Next, we're going to talk about global illumination and baking lighting for our scene.